Howdy, y'all. This is Los Man here, and it is Friday night, which means tonight will be a new episode of the Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs. Now, the clues that he gave for this week's episodes were quite vague. Really vague. I mean, he basically said it was two matinee idols who are not known for horror. Well, that could go. I mean, you could really go all over town with that list. So here's some predictions that I'm making because I don't know what the movies are going to be. Contrary to popular belief out there, I do not have all the answers. So, if you really want to go old school, you can go back to the 1950s. You could look at let's say Clint Eastwood. He was in a movie called Tarantula, which was one of his first roles, but that's probably not going to be it because that's too far back. And Joe Bob doesn't tend to show movies that are that old. So more than likely, it's going to be a movie that was more recent, like from the 70s or 80s, that featured somebody who either was famous for making other kind of movies, or maybe it was a movie that featured a young actor who is now known for other movies but isn't known for horror. So that list can include quite a number of people. My podcast partner, Lady Winters, who is most awesome, by the way, suggested that it might be He Knows You're Alone, which, if you're familiar with that movie, includes a very young Tom Hanks in his one and only horror movie role as the young man who thinks that horror movies are kind of silly. But if it is that movie, that actually would be pretty cool because it's a pretty interesting slasher movie from the early '80s and part of that Canada, horror movie scene that was popular back then. Now, of course, you also have Johnny Depp, who was in Nightmare on Elm Street, but you're not likely to see Nightmare on Elm Street because they typically don't show those kind of movies on the last drive-in. Well, let's take a look. Now let's get into a little more possible choices. You have George Clooney. He was in Return to Horror High and Return of the Killer Tomatoes. Now, that's a possibility, because George Clooney's known for other kinds of movies, but probably not because they're probably looking for movies that maybe included one role in horror, not two or three, just like George Clooney, because he was also in From Dusk Till Dawn. Well, you also have Brad Pitt. Now, Brad Pitt was in a movie called Cutting Class, which was one of his first forays into horror. Now, probably not. That movie actually wouldn't be a bad choice for The Last Drive-In. I mean, considering it has Joe Schloella in it, who I love to death. But probably not because he was also in an Interview with a Vampire, so probably not that. Now, here's a fun one. Leonardo DiCaprio. And you're thinking, Leonardo was in a horror movie? Why, yes, he was. He was in a movie called Critters 3. Yes, there were multiple Critter movies out there, so that's a possibility. Critters 3 might actually be an interesting choice to go with. Well, let's see. We also have Matthew McConaughey. What? That Matthew McConaughey? Hey, yes, that Matthew McConaughey. All right, all right, all right. He was in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, which, if you know that movie, you'll also know that Renee Zellweger was in that too because it was, filmed in Texas. They both went to that other school in Texas. Another possible choice would be Paul Rudd. Now, Paul Rudd was in The Curse of Michael Myers, one of the Halloween sequels that, came out in the 90s. Probably not that movie, though. Well, going down my list, and I'm pretty much gone through most other ones, but I'm going to tell you what I think is going to be. I do strongly believe that the Tom Hanks movie, He Knows You're Alone, may be a good possibility. I definitely would go with that, and if that's the case, then congrats to Lady Winters. But my choice that I think is going to be, and this is the one that I absolutely positively can give a, two thumbs up, possibility. Motel Hell. Rory Calhoun. It was one of his last roles, and being that Rory Calhoun was known for doing westerns, he was a cowboy, kind of good-looking guy. I think that would be the perfect movie for The Last Drive-In because it has Last Drive-In written all over it. It's kind of a cheap little movie from the early 80s, kind of gimmicky. It's got a great title. It's kind of a great pun. And it's such a fun little black comedy. And it hasn't been featured. Makes you wonder, why has it not been featured? But that's okay, because you know what? We'll wait and see. It is now about 5:30 Central Standard Time on a Friday before. So about 2.5 hours we'll find out, or maybe 3 hours, or 6 hours, or however long, it'll go. Now, this little video I'm putting together is sponsored by, well, not really sponsored, but it'll be accompanied by Steiner Bach because, what better way to enjoy a movie than to enjoy with a little bit of a liquid libation. I highly recommend Shiner Bock, which, by the way, is a Texas beer. I know a lot of people who are into wanting to support Joe Bob. You know, they've been drinking the Lone Star, and like I said in my last video, yeah. Okay, let me clarify. Lone Star is not a bad beer. It's a beer. It's not bad. I've had Lone Star. It's, you know, you can find it places in Texas. But in a way, Lone Star is like Corona. Not that Corona, of course. No, the Corona beer out of Mexico. It is a marketing gimmick. You know, you hear about Corona, you think Mexican beer. You hear about Texas, you think Lone Star. They're not bad. They're just not the best. I mean, if you really want to enjoy a good Texas beer that's actually worth drinking, go with Shiner Bock. It is a true Texas beer brewed 100 miles outside of San Antonio. Even Joe Bob Briggs himself probably enjoys this as much as as much as I do, you know, because after all, he is a Texan. He would know. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and close off this video. And like I said, my prediction probably He Knows You're Alone and Motel Hell. More than likely Motel Hell, but we'll see. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and call it a night.